Not bought flowers in 11 years. Not since the last time, which had ended the way it ended. Quietly and then all at once, in a hospital room on a Thursday afternoon while his son sat in the hallway outside eating crackers from a vending machine, because Daniel hadn't known what else to give him. That was 11 years ago. Noah was 4 then. He was 15 now, and he had somehow become the kind of person who left sticky notes on the refrigerator that said things like, "You should go and I'll be fine, Dad." And, most recently, her name is Claire, and Marcus says she's normal, which for Marcus means a lot. Daniel had read that last one 3 times, standing in the kitchen in his work boots, still holding his lunchbox, and had not known whether to laugh or sit down. He went. That was the thing. After 11 years of very good reasons not to, he went. The drive took 22 minutes. He sat in the parking lot of the restaurant for 9 of them with the engine off and his hands in his lap, watching the entrance the way a man watches something he's not sure he's ready to walk toward. The restaurant was the kind of place with candles on the tables and a menu written in a font that required effort. His co-worker Marcus had picked it. Marcus had also arranged the whole thing over several months and with the patience of someone who had decided the outcome before the process began, which was exactly how Marcus operated. "There's someone I want you to meet." He'd said it the first time in October, casually, between bites of a sandwich. Daniel had said no without looking up from his own food. Marcus had accepted this the way he accepted all of Daniel's refusals, which was by continuing to hold the same position until the ground shifted. The ground shifted on a Wednesday in February, when Noah left the sticky note, and Daniel, who had successfully resisted Marcus for 4 months, found that he could not successfully resist his 15-year-old son. He walked into the restaurant at 7:03. He had spent 40 minutes that afternoon standing in front of his closet, which contained mostly flannels and the kind of t-shirts that said things about places he'd visited in his 30s, and exactly 2 collared shirts, both of which he had tried on and put back twice before Noah appeared in the doorway, assessed the situation in approximately 6 seconds, and pointed at the gray one. "That one." "Why that one?" "Because it doesn't look like you're trying too hard." Noah had considered this. "But it also doesn't look like you forgot you had a date." Daniel had put on the gray shirt. Noah had watched him do it with the expression of someone overseeing a process they were not entirely confident in but were willing to supervise. He was looking for a woman named Claire. No photograph. Marcus had offered one, and Daniel had said no, which he now recognized as irrational because standing at the entrance of a restaurant, trying to locate someone based only on a name and the word normal was its own specific kind of difficult. He was scanning the tables near the window when someone said his name from behind him. Not a question. Not "Are you Daniel?" Just his name. The way you say someone's name when you already know the answer and you're simply confirming what you already suspected. He turned. She was standing 2 feet away, slightly out of breath, her coat collar up on one side and down on the other as if she'd been moving quickly and hadn't had time to fix it. She had dark eyes and the look of a person who had recently been running a very efficient internal argument and had resolved it just barely in favor of showing up. "I'm Claire," she said. "I recognize you from—" She stopped, started again. "Marcus described your truck." "He described my truck." He said it was the most honest vehicle he'd ever seen. A small pause. I think he meant it as a compliment. Something in Daniel's chest did something it had not done in a long time. He wasn't sure yet what to call it. He held the door. They were seated near the back, a corner table, and for the first several minutes the conversation had the careful quality of 2 people who were being very responsible about not assuming anything. She worked in urban planning. She had been in the city for 3 years, having relocated from Portland after something she described only as a recalibration, with a flatness in her voice that meant she knew exactly what it was and had decided not to perform it for strangers. Daniel appreciated this more than he could have said in a moment. He told her he did structural inspections, buildings mostly. She asked what that meant in practice, and he said it meant he spent a lot of time in old places looking for damage that wasn't visible from the outside, which was either a very dull answer or a slightly interesting one, and he wasn't sure which until she said, "That sounds like the kind of work that changes how you look at things." And he said, "Yeah, it does." Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation stopped being responsible and started being something else. Less careful, more actual. She laughed at something he said about a building in the warehouse district, A genuine laugh, not the performed kind. And he noticed the way her hands moved when she talked, the way she broke a piece of bread without looking at it because she was paying attention to something else. He noticed that she'd fixed the collar of her coat at some point without commenting on it having been wrong. He noticed that when the waiter came, she ordered directly and without fuss and didn't apologize for it. He was in the middle of noticing these things when she said, "Can I ask you something that might be a little much for a first dinner?" He said yes before he'd fully processed the question. "Marcus told me you've been on your own for a while," she said, "with your son." She looked at him steadily. "I just want you to know that I'm not going to make a face about it." The tilted head face. I know you've probably had a lot of tilted head faces. Daniel looked at her across the table. 11 years of tilted head faces. 11 years of the soft voice and the particular sympathy that was really just discomfort dressed up as concern. "I've had some," he said. "I used to do it," she said. The face. Before I understood what it actually communicated, which is not what people think it communicates. She picked up her water glass. "I'm sorry, in advance, for whoever I did that to." He didn't say anything for a moment. The restaurant moved around them, other tables, other voices, candles doing the thing candles do. He thought about 11 years of being the object of that face and the strange relief of sitting across from someone who had thought about it from the other side. "Thank you," he said, "for saying that." She nodded once, without ceremony, and they moved on. It was good. That was the thing he hadn't expected. Not tolerable, not manageable. Good in the way that things are good when they stop requiring effort and just become themselves. They stayed until the restaurant started clearing other tables around them, which was how Daniel became aware of how much time had passed, which was more than he'd tracked. They walked out together at 9:51. The February air was serious about itself. Cold in the way that settled into your collar and didn't negotiate. The street was quieter than when he'd arrived. A few cars. The sound of a restaurant somewhere down the block. They stood on the sidewalk the way people stand when something is ending and neither person is quite ready to be the one to mark it. Daniel knew this shape. He'd imagined it in a loose and reluctant way earlier in the week. The handshake. The polite conclusion. The return to the life he had built that was solid and sufficient and organized around his son and his work in the very specific rhythms of a household that had learned, over 11 years, to run without a second person in it. He knew how to do this. He knew how to take a good evening and put it carefully away somewhere, and return to the version of himself that did not need or expect anything additional. Well, Claire said. She wasn't quite looking at him. She was looking at somewhere in the middle distance that appeared to contain something requiring consideration. This was... Yeah, he said. It was. She looked at him then, something in her expression that was not quite finished, like a sentence that had reached its period but still had something attached to it that hadn't made it onto the page. She reached into her bag. He expected keys, or her phone, or the ordinary mechanics of ending an evening. What she took out was a photograph, small and slightly bent at the corner, the kind of photograph that had lived in a wallet long enough to learn its shape. She looked at it for a moment, then held it out toward him. "I don't usually do this," she said. He took it. It was a picture of two boys, maybe 8 and 10 years old, squinting against what looked like afternoon sun. Backyard somewhere, a fence in the background with a gate that was slightly off its hinge. One of the boys had his arm slung around the other one's shoulders with the aggressive competence of someone who had decided they were in charge of this photograph. "Which one?" he said. "The shorter one." She said it without self-pity. "My brother used to carry me to the bus stop when I was in 2nd grade because I was slow in the mornings. He did it for 2 years without being asked, without making it a thing." She paused. "He moved to Austin 6 years ago, and now I talk to him on Sundays and he still asks if I'm eating breakfast, and I'm 38 years old. Daniel looked at the photograph. The shorter boy had her eyes. He could see it now that he was looking. The same directness. The same quality of paying attention. "I carry that because," she said, and stopped. Started again. "I had a long stretch where I forgot that people could just show up for you without it being complicated, without there being a cost." She looked at the photograph in his hand. I keep it so I don't forget what that looks like. Daniel held the photograph carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else and has been trusted to you rather than handed over. He understood what she had just given him, not the photograph exactly, but the reason for it. The architecture, why a person carries something like that, what it's protecting against, what it's trying to remember. He thought about Noah at 15, leaving sticky notes on the refrigerator. You should go, as if he'd known something Daniel had been too careful to admit. He handed the photograph back. My son left me a note before I came tonight, he said. On the fridge. He does that, leaves notes. He paused. This one said you should go. I'll be fine. Something shifted in Claire's expression. Quiet. Real. How old? 15. And he told you to come. He told me to come. She was quiet for a moment. The cold moved around them, unhurried. He sounds like a good person. He is, Daniel said. He's a better person than I was at 15. Probably better than I am now. He said it without false modesty, just as a fact, the way you state facts about people you know well. He figured out something I'd been slow about. What's that? That safe isn't the same as good. He said it before he'd fully decided to, and once it was out he understood it was true in a way that it hadn't quite been before he'd said it out loud to another person. I built a very safe life. For both of us, and I got so good at it that I stopped asking whether safe was enough. Claire looked at him. She was not performing anything, not composing her face into the correct shape. She was just looking at him, steady and real, in the February cold outside a restaurant they had both been slightly too frightened to walk into. I sat in my car for 9 minutes before I came in, she said. He looked at her. I had my keys out. I had a perfectly rational argument for why I should just go home. I'm good at those. A small pause. I'm very good at those. What happened? She glanced down at her bag where the photograph was. I thought about my brother, carrying me to the bus stop. She looked up. He didn't ask if it was going to work out first. He just did it because it was the thing to do. She paused. I thought maybe I could do that. Just walk in, without needing to know first. Daniel stood on the sidewalk with that. 9 minutes. He had been sitting in his parking lot for 9 minutes at the same time she had been sitting in hers, both of them conducting the same argument with themselves, both of them barely winning it. He thought about what Noah's note had not said. It hadn't said, she's perfect, or it'll be great, or any of the things that would have required certainty. It had said, you should go. Present tense. Just the act of it, not the outcome. I'm going to call you, he said. That's all right. She looked at him for a moment. It's all right. I'm going to actually do it. I know, she said, and something in the way she said it suggested she did know, that she'd arrived at that conclusion somewhere between the soup and the dessert they'd both declined, and had simply been waiting for him to get there. She turned and walked toward the parking garage at the end of the block. He watched her go the way you watch something when you're making sure it's real and not the kind of thing that dissolves when you stop paying attention. Then he turned and walked toward his truck. He counted steps without meaning to. The air was cold and even, and his shoes were the practical kind that he wore to inspections, which had been a small source of low-level regret all evening and was now somehow fine. He counted to 14 before something in his chest said, wait, with the same certainty that Noah's sticky note had said you should go, and he stopped. He stood on the sidewalk. He understood what was happening. He had done this before, in different forms, a dozen times in 11 years. The moment where something possible appeared at the edge of his life, and he found a reason to let it pass. He was very practiced at this. He knew all the exits. He knew how to take a good evening and fold it neatly and put it in the category of nice things that happened once and return to the version of himself that was organized and reliable and needed nothing extra. He was still holding the shape of what she'd said. Safe isn't the same as good. He had said that. He had said it first. He turned around. She was 30 feet away, coat collar up again on both sides now, moving with her head slightly down against the cold. Claire. She stopped. She turned. Across the distance between them in the February dark with the restaurant behind him and the parking garage ahead of her and the city doing the city's indifferent thing around them both, she looked at him. He walked back. He didn't say the whole thing. Not standing there on the sidewalk with the cold and the 20 feet of space between them that he was closing step by step. He said enough. He said he'd had a good evening, which was true but not sufficient, and then he said that he was not usually someone who turned around, which was also true and slightly more sufficient. And she listened to both of these things with her coat collar up and her eyes steady and did not fill in his sentences for him, which he appreciated more than he could say. He asked if she wanted to have dinner again. She said yes. He said next week, and she said that worked. And they stood there for another minute in the way that people stand when the thing has been decided, and neither person wants to be the first to acknowledge that the evening is genuinely over now. And then she said goodnight. Daniel and he said goodnight, and she walked toward the parking garage, and he walked toward his truck, and this time he did not stop counting. He drove home with the radio off. The streets were the quiet late evening kind, traffic lights cycling through their colors for nobody in particular. He ran through the evening the way you run through something when you want to make sure it happened the way you think it happened. Checking the specific things, the photograph of the two boys, the way she'd said safe isn't the same as good back to him without saying she was doing it, the 9 minutes in the parking lot. Margaret was coming out of the front door when he pulled into the driveway, already in her coat, keys in hand. She was 71 and had lived next door for as long as they'd been in this house, and had a standing arrangement with Noah that she declined to explain, which Daniel had learned not to investigate. She gave him a look when he got out of the truck, the kind that asked a question without being technically a question. "It was good," he said. She made a sound that was not quite a word, but contained several complete sentences and walked to her car. The house was the way it was when Noah had been in it alone for several hours, which meant there was a plate in the dish rack that hadn't been there this morning, and a textbook open on the kitchen table, and a light on in the upstairs hallway that served no practical purpose. Daniel turned off the unnecessary light and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just in the quiet of it. Noah's door was closed. Not the way it was closed when he was asleep, but the way it was closed when he was awake and doing something and available, which Daniel knew the difference between. He knocked. Yeah. He opened the door. Noah was on his bed with his laptop, wearing the sweatshirt he wore when he wasn't planning to see anyone, which meant he had changed out of his regular clothes specifically to seem like he hadn't been doing anything. He was 15 and not as opaque as he believed himself to be, and Daniel did not say this. "Hey," Noah said, with the studied casualness of someone who had been thinking about this conversation for 2.5 hours. "Hey. How was it?" Daniel leaned against the doorframe. He looked at his son, who had his mother's forehead, and Daniel's habit of going quiet when something mattered, and who had left a sticky note on the refrigerator that said you should go because he had understood something at 15 that it had taken Daniel 11 years and a February sidewalk to say out loud. "He was good," Daniel said. "She's good." Noah's expression did the thing it did when he was processing something and did not want his face to give away that he was processing something, which was a small tightening around the eyes that Daniel knew exactly how to read and pretended not to. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Daniel paused. "I'm gonna call her." Noah looked at him. Something moved through his face that was not quite surprise and not quite satisfaction. Something older than 15 and quieter. "Good," he said. "Just that." The word sitting there with nothing attached to it, not performance, not told you so, just the plain fact of it delivered by someone who had known before Daniel had known and had done the simple thing of writing it on a piece of paper and sticking it to the refrigerator. Daniel said goodnight. Noah said goodnight. The door closed. He went down the hall and sat on the edge of his bed with his jacket still on for a minute, looking at nothing in particular. He thought about Claire's brother, 8 years old, carrying her to the bus stop for 2 years without making it a thing. He thought about the photograph, bent at the corner from living in a wallet. He thought about what a person carries and why, what they're holding on to and what they're trying to remember. He thought about 11 years, not the weight of them, but the shape. What they had made him good at and what they had made him careful about, and the difference between careful and closed, which he had been telling himself for a long time, was not a difference at all. He took off his jacket. He set it on the chair. He got up and went to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror, the way you look at yourself when you want to take inventory of something you can't quite name. He looked like a person who had driven to a restaurant he'd circled 3 times before pulling in, sat in a parking lot for 9 minutes, walked in, and then, at the end of the evening, on a sidewalk in February, turned around. He thought that was probably enough for one night. He turned off the light. In the morning, Noah was already at the kitchen table when Daniel came downstairs. Laptop opened, cereal bowl beside it, one sock on and one sock presumably somewhere in the house exercising its independence. He looked up when Daniel came in and did not say anything because Noah was 15 and had learned by some means Daniel had never fully identified that silence could ask the same question as words and sometimes got a better answer. Daniel poured his coffee. He stood at the counter for a moment. "I'm going to call her today," he said. Noah looked back at his screen. But something in his posture changed. A small settling, the kind that happens when something has been held for a while and is finally allowed to set down. "Okay," he said. Daniel drank his coffee. The morning was the ordinary kind, the light coming through the kitchen window at the angle it always came through in February, the particular quiet of a house that is occupied but not yet fully awake. He had driven past this version of the morning 10,000 times, had learned every corner of it, had built it into something solid and real and his. He drank his coffee and thought about a woman who had sat in a parking garage for 9 minutes, making a very convincing argument to herself, and had reached into her bag and had seen a photograph and had come in anyway. He finished his coffee. He set the mug in the dish rack. He picked up his phone and called her before he had time to build a convincing argument of his own. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was the same as it had been on the sidewalk, unhurried, direct, slightly warmer in a way that the cold outside had maybe been concealing. "I didn't think you'd call this early," she said. "I didn't think I would either," he said. A pause. The small sound of someone who might have been smiling on the other end of a phone, which was not something you could confirm, but which you knew anyway. Noah's cereal spoon touched the side of his bowl, once, and then the kitchen was quiet again. Daniel stood at the counter with the phone to his ear and the February light coming through the window, and his son at the table behind him, and he let it be good. There's a moment in Daniel's story that I keep coming back to. Not the part where he turns around on the sidewalk, though that matters. The part where he's standing in his kitchen in his work boots, holding his lunchbox, reading a sticky note his 15-year-old son left on the refrigerator. "You should go. I'll be fine, Dad." 5 words from a kid who had every reason to hold on tight and instead chose to open a door. I think about what it takes to become that kind of person. Noah didn't learn to do that from nowhere. You don't get a 15-year-old who writes notes like that without something being built quietly, over years, in the ordinary moments. Daniel showed up every day for 11 years, not perfectly, not without fear, but consistently. That consistency is its own kind of teaching. Kids don't learn from what we tell them. They learn from what we do when it's hard and no one's watching. That's the part I find myself sitting with. Daniel thought he was just surviving. Getting through the mornings, learning to braid hair, finding the left shoe in under 45 seconds. He didn't think he was raising someone who would one day understand grief and courage and the difference between safe and good better than he did. But he was. Every single day he was. There's a version of this story where Daniel stays in the parking lot, where he builds one more convincing argument, drives home, and returns to the life that asks nothing new of him. He's good at those arguments. He said so himself. Most of us are. We get very skilled at protecting ourselves from the things that might matter, because the things that matter are also the things that can hurt you. And after you've been hurt enough, the math starts to feel obvious. What shifted? It wasn't a grand realization. It was a piece of paper on a refrigerator. It was a photograph bent to the corner from living in a wallet for too long. It was Claire sitting in a parking garage for 9 minutes, losing the argument with herself, and going in anyway. Small acts, ordinary courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I think the real thing Daniel figured out on that February sidewalk, the thing he said out loud before he'd fully decided it was true, is that there's a difference between being responsible and being closed. He had been responsible for 11 years, for his son, for his work, for the shape of their life together. Responsibility is good. It's necessary. But it can become its own kind of hiding if you let it. You can use your obligations as a reason to never want anything for yourself, and call that integrity, and it will almost feel true. What Noah understood, and what Claire's brother understood when he carried a second grader to the bus stop for 2 years without making it a thing, is that showing up for people doesn't deplete you, it teaches you. It builds something in you that starts to believe, slowly, that you are also worth showing up for. That's the part Daniel had forgotten, not how to love someone. He never forgot that. But how to believe he was allowed to try again. He picked up the phone before he could argue himself out of it. That's the whole thing, really. You don't wait until the fear is gone. You just move before it finishes its sentence.